Hey everyone! So today's pretty exciting because we're going to be building a to-do app, but not just any to-do app, one that we're going to add authentication to. So you're going to log in, you're also going to be able to log out, and then you'll see your personalized to-do items as well as stuff like your username show up. Now, the coolest part about this is that we're also going to be deploying it so that you can share it around with your friends, family, they can log in, they can use it, and they'll see their own to-dos. Okay, so pretty complete project here. By the end, you'll be able to add users as well as allow them to add their own to-do items, delete their own to-do items, edit their own to-do items, as well as create new to-do items. Okay, so great. What are we waiting for? We're going to be doing this with a PostGres database as well as React for the front end and Node.js for the back end. Okay, so first off, I'm just going to sign up to Kinsta, which is where we're going to be hosting our front end, our back end, and then our Postgres database as well. Our front end and back end will be hosted from a GitHub repository. So that's going to make our lives a lot easier. And of course, the fact that everything is in one place as well is super convenient. So just go ahead and sign up. I do want to let you know that it is free to sign up to Kinsta. And they're kind of going to give you $20 in free hosting for your first month, okay? So as this is a tutorial, please do use that. And after that, you only pay for what you use each month. So we're not going to go over that free $20 in this tutorial, don't worry. But like I said, if you want to use the app frequently, after you deploy it, you might have to pay a little bit more, but don't worry, you can see exactly how much CPU usage and memory usage your app is taking, so you can monitor it from the dashboard also. You also get to enjoy the free daily backups, firewall, DDoS protection, SSL, and 24/7 global support if you get stuck. So there is also that too. Okay, so all I'm going to do is scroll down here and sign up. I'm just going to put in my personal information. So, stuff like my first name, my last name, and so on right here. So just go ahead and do the same. Obviously, this information is sensitive, so please don't share it. Once you have done that, you will also be asked for your credit card details. So please go ahead and put those in. Like I said, we're going to be very careful and definitely not go over that $20 limit. But, for using this, you're going to have to supply this information just in case you do go over that limit. Okay, great. So once that is all done, this is the dashboard that you should see. Okay, so this is the dashboard you will see. We're going to be essentially deploying two applications, a front end and a back end, like I said, and a Postgres database. And also the coolest part, again, like I mentioned, is that we can deploy them directly from our GitHub repositories. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect my GitHub. So continue with GitHub and just sign into my GitHub. So please go ahead and do the same and put in your password. And there we go. So that is now connected. We've done everything here that is preparing our app to be deployed thanks to this platform. So let's carry on. The next thing I'm going to do is just, you guessed it, create a repository for our project. So for this, I'm actually just going to get out my terminal just like so. Okay, I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger for you. And let's go ahead and save this project on our desktop. So I'm going to go into my desktop. If you want to see what I have on my computer, it's all of these things. I need to go into my desktop. So I'm going to use the command CD to go into my desktop. And here I'm going to use the create React app command in order to essentially create a React project with all the necessary configuration for me. So for this, I'm just going to clear everything in my terminal using command K. So command K, and I'm going to use npx, and then the command create React app, and then whatever we want to call this. So I'm going to call this deployed to do app. Okay, so this is by itself, then there's a space, then this is the command we're going to use, and there's a space, and this is what I'm calling my project. And I'm just going to hit enter and wait for that to do its thing. Okay, so we're going to wait for that. You can see it's already shown up here. And if I click on it, you will actually see all the files being populated for my React project. Okay, So let's wait for this to complete. Okay, and there are our files. This is looking good. I'm actually going to shut this down, and here is my project. Let's open it up. So to open it up, I'm actually going to open up VS Code. So I'm just going to create a new window. Okay, and there we go. We have now opened up VS Code, and I'm going to open that project up. So I'm simply going to search for it on my desktop, and there we have it, deployed to do app. I'm just going to open it up. There we go. So first off, I'm just going to clean this up and get rid of everything that we don't need for this project. So that's going to include getting rid of anything to do with tests. So setup test, revolver vitals, and also the logo SVG. So please go ahead and delete that too. I'm just going to move that to trash and delete this app test.js file. I'm also going to delete that, and the app CSS, as we're going to be holding all our CSS in one place, which means you're only really going to have 3 files in here. Once again, I'm just going to delete everything that we don't need in the index.js, delete everything that we don't need from here too. And I'm going to delete these semicolons just because that is my personal preference. So this is what your index.js file should look like at the moment. And your app.js file, once again, we don't need any of these. I'm going to change this to a functional expression just because, again, that is my personal preference. And let's just return a div, okay? So we're just going to return one div in the JSX, just like so, and get rid of any semicolons. And again, just delete everything in here. So once again, 3 files should now exist in the source directory. Your index.js file that looks like this, your app.js file, which looks like this, and your index.css file that looks like this. The next thing I'm going to do is actually put all of this in a directory. So make sure in the root of your project, to make sure that is the case, just click on the README and click here. And I'm going to call this client. And I'm literally going to grab everything in here, including the node modules, and drag it into this directory. Okay, great. So now my project called deployed to do app is literally just going to have a client directory with all these things in there. Next, I'm also going to create a server directory that's going to hold all our server code. And for this, well, if you click on the server directory and toggle the bottom panel to get up your terminal, we're going to have to essentially initialize this in order to use node modules. So making sure you're in the deployed app, also making sure in the server directory, so use cd to go into the server directory. I'm going to initialize this using npm init and just hit enter. Okay, so then you'll have some prompts. I just want you to choose all the default ones by hitting enter, 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 and there we go. So now our package JSON file has been created using all the defaults that I chose. So we've got a server directory and a client directory. This is looking good. Okay, so I'm also going to want to have a .env file on both of them. But one thing I'm also going to have to do that's going to help us deploy this is have another package JSON file, okay? Not in the server and not on the client, but actually in the app itself. So let's go out of the server using cd ... and make sure you're on the deploy to do app. And once again, just do npm init and hit enter and just do all the defaults. Okay, so there we go. There's our package JSON file right now. Wonderful. Okay, so great. We have our client, we have our server, we also have a package JSON file in the root of our project. Now make sure you're on this one, right, and not the other two. This can be very confusing, so just make sure you're on this one. And we're going to write some commands. I'm going to get rid of this. We're going to write some scripts in order to essentially build our front end and our back end. So this is the command that we're going to be using. I'm just going to paste it in here and talk you through it. So we're going to need a if env package. And then we're going to essentially go into the server and install all the packages from its package JSON, and also do the same for the client. So for now, just save this as it is, get rid of that trailing comma, and we're going to have to install this package. So making sure you're in the deployed to-do app, that is important, not the other two. Just check you're not in server or client. I'm going to install that if env package. So just go ahead and do that, and it should show up as a dependency here, and there it is. Great. So now we can use it in this script. Next, I'm going to write a command to essentially start our server, and for that we use node, and we're going to go into this server directory, and we're going to create a server.js file that holds all our backend code. We're going to do the same for the client, and this time I'm going to go into the client directory and use the command npm start in order to start it. Okay, so these should be familiar to you. We're just doing everything from this one file instead of separately. Okay, so great. This is looking good. I'm ready to carry on. Now, we don't need a main for this file, so let's just get rid of that. And we don't really need an author or a license. You can keep it if you want, but I'm not going to. Let's move on. So we have our package JSON. The next thing I'm going to do is essentially create that server.js file. So making sure you're in the server this time, just double check that you're clicked on here, create a server.js file. So this is essentially going to hold our backend. Okay, great. So this is looking good. I think we should start with the client first and just making sure the UI looks nice. So let's do that first. Let's start up our client. So I'm just going to get rid of everything, right? And just make sure you're in the client. I'm going to minimize these for now. Make sure you're in the client. So once again, just get up your terminals and make sure you're in the client. So cd client, because we're going to use this package JSON in order to start this. And this is the script we need. So just do npm run start in order to start your client. And that should open up in your browser, okay? So there we go. If I go ahead and inspect this page, this should just help us out by letting us see the elements. Of course, at the moment, there isn't anything in here. If you look in the body and the div with the ID of root, where we're essentially injecting our whole app, there should just be that one div from the app.js file. So this is looking good. And of course, if I now, I'm just going to minimize this, go into the app.js file, which is in the source directory, and type Ania, just like so. That should show up in this div, but also in here. Great. Let's carry on. Okay, so what's our app going to consist of? Well, I'm going to essentially want to make an auth modal for logging in, a list header, and some list items. Okay, so that's what my app is going to be made of. So perhaps let's also in the source directory, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it components, and I'm going to keep all my components in here. So my first component is going to be an auth modal. And also we're going to have a list header. Let's also have list items. So list item.js, and that's going to hold one component for a list item. And I think this should be it. And let's also create a modal for essentially creating new elements. So modal.js, so creating new list items. I'm also going to make my own custom progress bar. So create that. And I'm also going to create my custom tick icon component. Okay. So just go ahead and create those. Now, the easiest thing to do is just essentially copy the app.js file content. And for each of these, just paste it in and replace these with whatever we have called the component, just to make everything super readable. So that's my auth.js. Let's shut it down. Here is going to be my list header. So list header. Apart from we didn't make that a JS file, so let's rename it. We need to let our code editor know this is a JS file by adding the .js extension. And that will now be treated as JavaScript. Great. Now let's do our list item. So I'm just going to change this to be list item, and same for here, list item, and get rid of that. Next, let's do the modal. So we're just in the modal now. Modal and modal. If you're ever not sure what file we are in, you can see that file highlighted there. Now let's do the progress bar. So just spelling it exactly the same as we call the file to make things a lot more readable and our lives a lot more easier. And finally, the tick icon. So tick icon and tick icon. Great. So there we go. And now in my app.js file, so let's just go back to our app.js file where we're going to put in the list header first. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's import that list header. I'm going to import list header from, if I can only spell it correctly, and then let's go into the components, right? So which means we need to go into the components and find that list header so that we can import it into here. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just put in the list header, just like so. And perhaps let's give this the class name of app so we can style it up kind of like an app. Great. So there is my list header. Let's go ahead and pass through a list name first. So if I go ahead and pass through a prop, and let's just call this list, this to-do list, holiday tick list, for example. I'm going to show you how to pass through this prop. So holiday tick list. Let's also maybe go ahead and put an emoji. Why not? We are on holiday and we can use emojis in code editors. So I'm getting that component, I'm passing through a prop, which means that on this, I need to destructure that prop and pass it through. Okay, so this is me destructuring the prop, which is essentially an object. I'm destructuring that object of props, and I'm getting through the list name, which means that in my list header, I can essentially show it like this if I want. So using these curly braces will just let our code editor know to not treat this as text, but treat it as code. So now if I look in here, yay, holiday tick list is showing up because we've created a div with a class of app, and this essentially is representing my list header, okay? Let's perhaps give this the class name of list header so it's really obvious. So list header, just like so. And let's put this in an H1 element. Okay, so I'm just going to paste that in like so. So now if we look in here, ta-da, this is essentially representing my list header component, and in it is an H1 element with holiday tick list. Wonderful. So I'm happy with this so far. Perhaps let's style up our app and our list header next. So let's grab the class name, and in my index.css file, I'm just going to grab the class name of app. Okay, I'm also going to grab the class name of list header. So let's go ahead and grab both those things, just like so. So first off, before we do anything, I'm just going to grab the body and let's get rid of any default padding and margin. So I'm just going to set them both to be 0, margin 0, padding 0, just like so. I'm just going to perhaps minimize that. And I'm going to actually make the background color of this Alice blue. And maybe just let's change it a little bit. Okay, so just like so. And I'm going to use display flex to initialize flexbox on the body. And I want to center everything from left to right. So I use justify content center. I'm also going to set the font family in here. And I want to go with Trebuchet MS and Arial and sans serif as backups. Okay, so that's what I have done. Next, on the app itself, well, I'm just going to give this a background color of white this time, so RGB 255, 255, 255. And I'm going to also maybe give it a box shadow. So box shadow, and my box shadow, well, I'm going to use black, but a transparent black, so hence the A, and my opacity is going to be 0.05. Next, I want to say that I want 0 x-axis shadow, 6 pixels on the y-axis, 24 pixels blur. And then I'm going to overlay it with another box shadow. So once again, I'm going to use black, but a transparent black, and 0.08 opacity, and 0 x-axis, 0 y-axis, 0 blur, and 1 pixel spread. So that is my box shadow. I'm also going to round it off using border radius to round off the edges, and I'm going to use 10 pixels for that. So 10 pixels border radius is what I am using. Let's also pad it out from everything that I'm going to put inside of it by 10 pixels. And I'm going to hard code the width to be 800 pixels. Okay, let's also space it from the top of my body by 50 pixels. Okay, so at the moment, this will look like that. There is my app. I've spaced it out 50 pixels. I rounded off the edges. I've given it a box shadow, and I think this is looking really good. The next thing I'm going to do is just style up my list header. But to do that, I think we need to put more things in the list header. So let's go ahead and do that. So my list header, I'm going to, as well as put the list name, I'm also going to put in another div, and this is going to hold some buttons. So I'm actually going to give this the class name of button container. So let's go ahead and do that. Button container, just like so. And in here, we're going to have 2 buttons. So we're going to add 1 button, just like this. And this is going to be add new. So we can add a new list item. And also another button that is going to essentially help us sign out. So that's what I have done. And I'm going to give these both class names as well. So this is going to be to create. It's a button with a class name of create. And this one is going to have a class name of essentially sign out. So we can pick them out and style them accordingly. They're also going to essentially have on clicks, but they're going to do 2 different things. So I think perhaps maybe we can add an on click to this for now. So on click. And this is just going to call a function to sign out, which I'm going to define here. I'm going to use functional expressions for this, so const sign out. And the sign out function, for now, I'm just going to console log sign out, okay? Because we are essentially going to have to do a bunch of stuff in here that we have not come close to even covering yet. I want to do it step by step. Okay, so that is our function to sign at the moment. I'm not going to add an on-click to this yet because we will do that in due course. Okay, great. So that is my list header. Let's go ahead and grab the button container as well. So that is something that I'm going to do. I'm actually going to just put list header here so it's really obvious what we are styling. So we can even make sure that this button container, if it lives inside the list header, is going to have the styling, or we can make it generic. So I'm in fact going to make it generic. So let's go ahead and grab this and just put it up here with everything that's generic. And I'm just going to make sure that the 2 buttons appear next to each other. So I'm going to use display flex, and I'm also going to align the items from top to bottom center. So that's what I have done. And next, I'm also going to say that any button that lives inside the button container, so just like so, is going to have a margin from 0 on the top and bottom and 5 pixels on the left and right. And let's also give it some padding on the inside of the button, 5 pixels on the top and bottom and 10 pixels from left to right. I'm also going to give each button a border radius of 12 pixels, so it's kind of more like a pill shape. And let's just get rid of the background color. I'm going to make the background color transparent. Okay, so if we look in here, that is what they should both look like at the moment. Great. I think the font size should also be smaller. So perhaps let's also add a font size to these. I'm going to go ahead and give this the font size of 10 pixels. And wonderful. So that's what they both look like. The next thing I want to do is make both the H1 element and the div with the class of button container appear next to each other. So we need to use display flex for this. So on the list header, I'm essentially going to use display flex and justify their content in between. So let's first off make sure that it's 100% of its parent. And I'm now going to initialize flexbox. And next I'm going to use justify content space between to space out those two child elements. Okay, and I'm also actually going to give my list header a border bottom. So I'm going to make this a gray line, or maybe let's make it a transparent line. So black with 0.05 opacity. And let's also make it 1 pixel and solid. Okay, so that's what I've done. It's very faint, but I've essentially added that line. And great, those two items have been, so both childs of the list header, so the h1 element, and the div of the class of button container have been spaced evenly. Wonderful. So this is looking good. I'm happy with that. The next thing I think we should do is style up our list items. But for this, we're going to have to need some data. So let's go ahead and do that next. So for this, I'm actually going to use PostGres, right? I'm going to use PostGres locally on my computer. So let's go ahead and install PostGres if you haven't already. So just please go ahead and go to PostGres and downloads, and just download the one for you. For me, it would be Mac OS, so I would go ahead and do that. But of course, I've already done it. So please go ahead and choose the one that's right for you. And once it appears on your computer, for me, it's at the top of my computer, and I can just open it up. So I can open up PostGres like this. Okay, it's in the top tab. There's my PostGres, and I can click Start in order to start it. Now here, just go ahead and click on PostGres, just like so, and we're going to have to create a new database. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger for you, and let's write the commands to start a new database. So for this, I'm going to just do create database, just like so, and I'm going to call it to-do app, and just hit that semicolon right here. And great. So once it has appeared, just double click on it. Okay, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, and we're going to create our first table. Now, to make this a little bit easier for you, I'm actually just going to write the commands, the SQL commands for this. Let's go ahead and do it in the server, as that's essentially kind of linked to the server. So in your server directory, just click on here, create a new file, and I'm going to call it data.sql, giving it the SQL extension so that our code editor knows to treat this as SQL. So the commands, we've already written one. One is create database, and we called our database to-do app. So just put that in there as a reminder for you. And the next one is create table to-dos. Okay, so that's what our table is going to be called, that lives in the to-do app. And now we're going to define the columns that it will take. The first is going to be an ID. This is going to be a primary key. It's going to be how we're going to find things in our table. And as the type, I'm going to put varchar with 255 characters. So we can essentially put strings in as the ID. That's what I decided. And let's also make sure this is a primary key. This is how we're going to find stuff in our table. The next thing I'm going to put in is a user email. Okay, so this is essentially who the to-do app is linked with. And once again, I'm going to use varchar. So that is something I have done. The next thing I want to put is the title of the to-do. And again, I'm going to use varchar. However, this time, let's just limit it to 30. Okay, because I'm going to limit that on our form as well, so it's not super long. Next, I'm also going to put the progress, and this is going to be an integer value. Okay, our progress is an integer because we're going to have to want to display that on the progress bar. And finally, the date of when this was created, and I'm actually going to use varchar for this as well. We can even have 300 if we want, and get rid of the trailing comma and add the semicolon at the end. I'm also going to actually want to create another table. So create table is the SQL command, and this is going to be for the users. So this is essentially going to store our user by its email, and that's going to be unique. And this time is going to be our primary key. Let's also specify that this is text. And we're also going to store the hashed password, not the actual password itself. That is super not safe. Okay, we're going to store a hashed password. So we will come to that when the time comes. And don't forget the semicolon at the end. So these are my two tables. Now it's really easy. I'm just going to copy all of this. And it just means that in the terminal, in my to-do app database, I'm going to create that table of to-dos by just pasting that in and hitting enter. So that has now been created. And let's also create a table of users. So let's paste that in and hit enter. So great. So at the moment, if I do the command select all, this is select all from, that's the SQL command, to-dos, there will be nothing in there, okay? And if we want to create a to-do, so I'm just going to use Command K to clear everything in here. I can use the command insert into to-dos. So that is the command that I will be using to insert that into my database. So let's go ahead and maybe do that now. I'm going to show you how to do that. So in order to insert into our SQL database, into this table called to-dos, I'm going to essentially define the columns that we want to insert into. So for this, well, we should probably have an ID. So let's go ahead and put ID. The next one we called user email, making sure to spell it exactly the same as the columns we just wrote, a title, some progress, and a date. So that's what I'm going to want to put into there. And as the values, we can now define the values. So the ID for this, I'm just going to put 0 for now. My user email is going to be anya@test.com. And then my title of my to-do is just going to be first to do. We don't have to have it capital, so first to do. The progress of this, let's say 10, and the date is just going to be today. So I'm going to go ahead and just post the new date object response for today. So I'm going to do new date and call it. Please go ahead and copy this. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, and then don't forget to finish off, and everything that's a string should be a string in here. So what did we give varchar to? Well, we actually gave it to the ID, so this needs to be a string. The email also needs to be a string. The title needs to be a string. The progress doesn't have to be a string. This needs to be a string, so the whole thing, okay? The date needs to also be a string. And now we close off the values and use our semicolon and hit enter. So now if we do select all from our table called to-dos, ta-da, you will see one item in our table. I've just added that, okay, using the insert into command. So we have one item in here so far. Great. Now let's get to writing some code in order to get that one item from our PostGres database, and we're going to do so in the server. So let's get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of that and the list header and the app.js file. And let's get to writing some server-side code. So I'm going to minimize this client, and I'm just going to click on the server.js file that lives in our server directory. So let's do it. Let's set up our server. So for our server, we're going to have to need a few packages. So just go ahead and open up that bottom panel and just go ahead and click here. We're going to create a new terminal. So we don't want to stop the front end from running. So just make sure that it's still running. And in the deploy to do app, just go into the server directory. So we are now in the server directory. The packages that I'm going to have to install, so use npmi, making sure that you are in the server directory, are going to be express, that's going to help us with our routing, cause to get rid of any cause error messages that don't allow us to communicate with our database. And then we're also going to have the package bcrypt that is going to help us essentially hash our passwords. So we will cover that when the time comes to it. We're going to use JSON Web Token, which is going to help us create a token so that we can stay logged into the app, even if we navigate off it. And we're going to use another package called UUID, which is going to help us generate a random unique identifier. Another package that we're going to use is .env to help us essentially work with secret variables. And I think that should be it. Nodemon is another package that we're going to have to use in order to essentially listen out for changes on our server.js file. So if you don't have these two installed globally on your computer, please go ahead and install those and just hit enter. And wait for that to essentially populate in the package.json file. Okay, so just the package.json file. Again, just check that it lives in the server and it's not the other two. So server package.json is what it should say. And those should populate there. Now, if you are watching this in the future and having any issues, it could be down to the package you are using, so the package version. So if your package version isn't the same as mine, just go ahead and change it like so and run npm-i again, and that will reinstall all these packages along with that version. However, I'm not going to do that because these are the packages that I need. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So these are my packages. Again, if you don't know what I meant by installing a package globally, you can install something globally by doing npm-i-g for globally and then the package. And that will mean that it's installed on your actual software, so on your computer, and you can use it anytime. However, I think it's quite nice to actually have the packages visible so that when someone's looking on your GitHub, it's very obvious which packages you used for the project. Great. And next, I'm just going to write some code to start this up. Okay, so let's just double check we have all the packages that we need. Another package that we actually need is PG to work with our PostGres database. So just go ahead and add that one too. Wonderful. Now the script to start this, so I'm just going to get rid of this script because to start this, I'm going to have a command, and I'm going to use nodemon to listen out for constant changes, okay, constant changes on my server.js file. So this is opposed to me just using node, okay? Node will listen out for one, it will essentially run the script once, but nodemon will listen out for constant changes. So that is a great package to use. To deploy this, okay, well, we're not going to have to listen out for changes because, you know, it's going to be kind of deployed. We can't make any changes. So I'm just going to use node and file name. The build script for this, well, it's just going to use React scripts build. I'm just going to add some generic scripts here. So test is going to use React scripts test. And then eject is going to use React scripts eject. Okay, so that's all I really need in here, which means that now to start the server, I'm going to do npm run start. Okay, making sure that you're in the server. So save this file and then run that script, and you should see this green code showing up, and nodemon essentially is listening out for changes. Okay, so we can minimize that. Okay, great. So this is looking good. Now let's go back to our server.js file. So here is our server.js file. I'm going to have to essentially decide what port we want to run it on. However, we might want to change this port. So we might want to change the variable port on Kinsta. So this essentially is going to access a secret variable. Or if one doesn't exist, we're just going to use port 8000. Okay, so that's what that line of code means. I'm not going to add this port variable in our project. This is something that I will be adding in the Kinsta platform. So just keep that in mind. Now let's actually get Express. So this is going to require the package Express. Okay, so we're getting all of that package. We're saving it under this constant. And then once we have that constant, we're going to call it so it releases all of its wonderfulness, all of its methods, and I'm going to save it as app so we can use it. Which means that now app has all those wonderful methods and properties, and I can use it. So listen is one of them. Listen comes with Express, and I could use app listen to listen out for changes on the port. So port, and then I'm just going to put a callback function, and this is essentially going to say server running on port, and then we're going to use the $signs and curly braces so that it treats this as code and not as text. So now if we look in here, so just toggle the panel and we make some changes in here. So just, you know, hit save. Okay, it's restarting due to changes. And let's console log this out. So console log server running on port 8000, and that should show up. So every time we make a change, nodemon is restarting due to changes, okay, and the server is running on port 8000. So this is looking good. So now that just means that if we write a root, so this is what Express is for. I'm going to use app get, and then I can just say that the root is this, and then let's use the request and response. I could do res send to send something to our browser going, hello. Okay, which means that now if we actually visit localhost 8000, it will say hello. Okay, and we can of course change it to hello Anya if we wish, and then just refresh and that will show up. So that is routing. That's what we're going to do, and we're going to change our route in order to do different things every time we visit a different route. So you can keep that or you don't have to. I'm not going to. So great, we have Express working. So now I'm going to essentially write some code to get all of our to-dos. So get all to-dos. Okay, so I'm going to do app get once more. So get is the method that I am using in order to get. It's a request, okay, and I want to visit to-dos for now. Okay, that's the endpoint that I want to visit. And then I'm going to use request response. And I'm just going to essentially write that query, the SQL query, and I'm going to do so in a try and catch block. So try catch, and the catch is going to essentially catch any errors and just console log them out. So console error. This is just for us, okay? You won't see them anywhere. It's for error handling. So we can read exactly what is going on and why something isn't working. Okay? So I'm going to use the await keyword, which means I need to make this an async function, and I'm going to await. Now we're going to actually have to use Postgres, the Postgres package, in order to communicate with our Postgres database. So let's just comment that out, and I'm actually going to write a new file to help us do this. So this file is just going to be called db.js. And in here, well, I'm going to define pool. So this is just from the Postgres documentation, and I'm going to require the package PG that we just installed, and I'm going to get the pool. Okay, now I'm also going to require the .env package, as we're going to hold some sensitive information in here, and also information that we want to hold on Kinsta, right? So that is how we would essentially use .env. Now let's define our pool. So this is essentially how we're going to communicate with our Postgres database. So for this, I need the new pool constructor, which we just got from the package, and I'm going to create an object. So that is my object. And in my object, I'm going to have to pass through a user. So for this, I know that my username for Postgres is Kubo Ania. We're also going to have to pass through the password that we have for our database. So I'm going to put that in a secret file. We're also going to have the host, and the host is localhost. So we can put that as a string. So I'm just going to put localhost. Okay. Next, we're also going to have the port. So the port is 5432, I believe. And then the database name, which we know is called to-do app, as that's what we called our database on Postgres, right? So if we look in here, it's just the name of this. Great. And then we're going to do module exports pool. So this is going to be our code to help us communicate with our Postgres database. Let's just create a .env file. So just make sure it's in the same place as that db.js file. So .env is what I'm going to create. And I'm essentially going to hold a bunch of secret stuff. So I'm going to hold my username, which is Kubo Ania, or actually it's Ania Kubo, sorry. So that is my username for my Postgres database. Notice how I haven't made it a string. I don't need to. Okay, that is implied. My password, which I'm going to put in last, and then the host, which is localhost, and then the port. I'm going to put DB port so we don't confuse it with the other port that we are using, which is 8000. So my DB port is going to be 5432. So now in order to access these secret variables, I'm going to use, so I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to use process env, and then whatever I call that variable. So same for the password, process env, and then password. Same for the host, so process env, and whatever we called it here, host. And then the port, which is this. So DB port is another thing that's going to go in here. So to access it, I use process env, and then whatever I call that variable. Great. So now I'm just going to put in my password here to communicate with my database. And wonderful. Making sure to spell that correctly. So module exports. So now that is it. Let's check if this works. So to use the contents of this file, I'm going to have to import it into here. So I can do so. Let's call the content of that file pool, as that is what we are exporting. And I'm going to require, and then I'm going to essentially go into that file. We don't need to add the JS extension because this is a JS file, so that is implied. Great. And now in order to use that pool, I can in here use await. It's going to minimize that. Pool.query, and then I can write my query, which is select all, because we want everything from to do, so from to do. So we're essentially using SQL. Okay, so let's test it out. Let's get the response of this and save it under the const to-dos. Okay, and then I'm just going to show it. So I'm going to use res.json in order to show it in the browser as JSON, and I'm going to get the to-dos and I'm going to get the rows. Okay, so let's test it out. Let's visit this endpoint. So localhost 8000 / to-dos. And great, we get the to-do rows, okay? It's an array of one item. That one item is represented by an object that has an ID, a username, a title, a progress, and a date. So amazing. This is looking so good. Okay, just make sure you do return the rows, because otherwise, if we save this and refresh, that will work, but it'll give us a lot of other stuff that we don't really care about. We just care about the rows. Okay, so just get the rows, which luckily for us is a nice little neat array. Wonderful. So this is looking good. However, because we want to log in and log out of the app, I only want to get certain to-dos based by their email. So what we're going to do is write some more SQL. So we're going to essentially change this command, select all from to-dos where the user email column equals, and then whatever variable we pass in. So the first variable we pass in, which is going to be a user email. Okay. And we're going to get that user email essentially from the front end. But for now, I'm going to just hard code user email as my email, so Anya test, and just stick it in here as a string. So now this should essentially, if I call this, just bring back one item short. But if I change this to Anya 2, it should come back with nothing, because Anya 2 does not exist, right? Anya 2 has not made any items to put in our table called to-dos, and we're searching it and we're looking for the email of Anya. Okay, so this variable is essentially the first item we put in this array. Great, let's carry on. So now I think it's time to connect this backend to the front end. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's go back into our client and let's go back on the app.js file. Okay, wonderful, because we're going to get that data next. So in order to get that data, I'm of course going to, you guessed it, write a function, and that function is called getData. And I'm going to essentially write this code. So to get the data, we're going to use try and catch once more, just because the catch is really good at, helping us read the errors. I will show you this when the time comes. So console log or console error is probably better. Okay. And this time, again, we're going to use the fetch keyword. And this is an async method, which means it returns a promise, which needs to be resolved. So we're going to use await. And once it's resolved, we'll save it as something. I'm just going to save it as the response, as that's what it is. Okay, and we use the await keyword here, which means we need to make this an async function. Now, what do we want to fetch exactly? Well, we want to fetch this. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fetch this. Notice how I use backticks because I also want to pass through a parameter. I want to pass through the user email, okay? So that it knows to just get our user email, and we can do that by passing a parameter through with the URL. So let's do that. I'm going to do / and then I'm just going to pass through the user email. Okay, so let's check this works first. I'm going to save this and let's copy that. And I'm just going to, for now, well, to get the JSON, this response, we need to get the JSON from it by using JSON method, but this is an async method. So we're going to have to use the await keyword, and the response of this, let's save it as JSON, as that's exactly what it is. And I'm just going to console log the JSON. Okay, so now if I call this function, I'm actually going to call it in a use effect. So use effect, and then this is the syntax for use effect, and I'm just going to call that. We're going to do a bunch of stuff in here as well. So actually, no, we're not. So let's just put this on one line, just like so, just to make our lives a lot easier. Okay, and then we're also going to pass through an empty dependency. So this is essentially going to run, well, once, technically twice, but it's going to help us get our data and not keep rerunning this. So if we didn't put an empty dependency in here, it will run infinitely, but we just want it to run once, hence we just put that. Okay, and now let's import use effect from React. Okay. So let's define our user email here. So I'm going to do const user email, and instead of having the user email on the back end, so here I'm going to try pass it through from the front end. So here it lives now. I'm going to pass it through as a parameter, so which means that on here we need to get the request params and get the user email from it. So I'm also going to just console log the whole request so we can see what's going on in the back end as well as the front end. Okay, so save this, and now here, if I refresh this and let's look at our console log, we are getting a blocked by cause policy. So in order to get around this, let's go to our server. Let's import the course package. So course require the package course. And now I'm going to use course by getting app use. So this is express and just calling course in it. So that will essentially get rid of this cause message that is blocking us by the cause policy. And great. So there we go. However, this doesn't really seem to like this. Why is that? It says 404 not found. Okay, so it's passing through the email, however. Now let's go to our back end. We need to pass it through here as well. So we need to essentially here say that a parameter is being passed. Okay, we are defining that route. And by using ... it just means we don't know what this is. This is a kind of parameter that exists, okay? So it knows to essentially look for something with a parameter. So we know that it's being passed through into here. Let's console log the whole request, which we are doing. And now let's check in here. So this is the entire request that's being console logged out. Let's find the params. So I'm just going to search the whole request. This is the entire request, okay? So there we go, and params does exist here. So at the moment, the request params was saving all of this to the user email. We don't want that, we just want this property. So I can destructure this whole object, okay? And just get the user email. So that is something you can do. Or you can, this is also valid, just go into this object and get the user email and save that to the const user email. So both ways are fine. However, if you have more than one param, you probably want to destructure the param. So I'm just going to do that just because I think it's a good thing to learn. So now that should essentially allow us to use the user email, so this string, and pass it through into this command. So let's just minimize that and try again. So let's test this out. I'm just going to console log user email, so it's really obvious that this has been destructured. And let's test it out. So I'm just going to refresh this. And great, we are getting back that one object. And if we look in here, there is our email. Okay, it has been destructured, so we can pass it through into here. Wonderful. Okay, so let's carry on. So that is working fine. We are now able to get to-dos based on a certain email address, based on what user email we pass through into here. Of course, this is being hard-coded. We are going to have to get that from when we log in, but we will do that later on. So for now, I'm just going to say that up here, and let's move on. So at the moment, we're console logging the JSON to essentially show up in this URL. So if I wanted to, I could even go to localhost 8000 /to-dos and just hard code anya@test.com, and it should come back with that. So that's essentially all I'm doing. I'm constructing a URL. However, I want to actually save this JSON to the app, right? So I can do so with use state. So const, let's save it as tasks. And then let's also change those tasks with set tasks. And then I'm going to use state in order to essentially say that the beginning state of tasks is going to be null. Okay, so let's import use state from React as well. So use state. And now this will be assigned to here, and we can change it using set tasks. So I'm going to change task from being null to whatever the JSON is. Okay, so that's what I have done. Let's not console log this out anymore. I am, however, going to console log the tasks here so that we can see them. So now, ta-da, there are our tasks. There's just one in here. However, next, let's actually get to using those tasks in order to map them out onto list items. So let's do that next. Okay. So at the moment, there is only one task in there. However, if I want to sort by date, so if I want to get those tasks and sort them by date, I'm going to use the sort method. And I will get the tasks and check if they exist, because at the beginning they are null. On the first render, they are null. And if they exist, I'm going to use the sort method to essentially compare A to B. And what I'm going to do is essentially get the first task's date. So I'm going into the object and using dot notation, getting the date. So it would return this. And just in case it's in any funky format, I'm going to pass it through into the new date constructor from JavaScript. And what I'm going to do is essentially compare it. So to compare date to date, I'm going to get the A date and the B date. And I'm going to also pass this through into the new date object, just like so. And that will sort our dates. This will come back with a new array. So I'm going to store this as sorted tasks. Okay, so that's what I have done. Now I'm going to get those sorted tasks. So essentially, let's get up our curly braces so that JSX knows not to treat this like text. And I'm going to get those sorted tasks. And if they exist, I'm going to map each one onto a list item element. Okay. So there we go. Now let's import that list item element. So import list item from, and let's go into the components and get that list item. So there we go. So now that list item is imported, we should just have one, but let's complete the syntax first. So to map, well, first off, I need to look into the array and get each task. Okay, and for each task, I'm just going to map it onto the list item. When we map, each component also needs a key, and luckily for us, our task does have a unique ID, so I could just use that ID. And then I'm just going to get that task, the whole object, and pass it through into our list item. So that's what I have done, which means that now on the list item, let's get up our list item. So let's look in the components. let's get the whole task, so the whole object, and destructure it. Okay, which means that now I have access to this whole task, this whole object, and all of its properties. So if I just want to go ahead and put in a P element, let's get up our curly braces, that shows the task title, I can do that. And there it goes. Okay, wonderful. So now that that whole object is being passed through, we do have access to all of its properties. However, I also want to style this up a little bit to look like an actual list item. So I'm going to give this the class name of list item, and let's style it up. Okay, so for this, I'm just going to get my index CSS file up. And this time we're going to be styling each individual list item. So let's grab that class name. So the class name of list item, just like so. I'm going to say that each list item is going to have a width of 100% of its parent. I'm going to give a margin of top 10 pixels and bottom 10 pixels and 0 from the left and right to space them out from each other. Let's also round each one off. So I'm going to give each one a border radius of 10 pixels. And then I'm also going to do box shadow on each one. The box shadow I'm going to give is going to be black, but a transparent black with 0.08 opacity. I'm going to go 0 x-axis, 0 y-axis, 0 blur, and 1 pixel spread. Okay, so that's the box shadow I'm going to give it. So at the moment, it will look like this. Okay, great. So I think this looks okay for now. I'm just going to also want to initialize flexbox, as I want everything in the list item to essentially go from left to right and have equal space in between it. So I'm going to do justify content, this time space between. Wonderful. So that is my list item now. Let's go ahead and put more stuff into here. So what else do I want to put in here? Well, I think I'm going to actually create a div, and this is going to hold our information. So I'm going to give this the class name of info container. So I'm going to put info container just like so. And in here, well, I'm going to put the task title. I'm also going to give this the class name of task title, so we can pick it out later. Okay, great. I'm also going to actually put in the progress bar. So let's go ahead and put the progress bar element in here. And I'm also going to put in an icon in the info container. So the tick icon is one that I made. So again, it's a component. Okay, so now let's import those two things. I'm going to import tick icon from, and let's go into the tick icon file. And once again, I'm going to do the same for importing the progress bar. So progress bar from, and as it's in the same place as we are in now, I just need to get the progress bar. So great. So those are essentially the things that live in my info container. Next, I'm also going to want to create a button container. Okay, so let's create another div. This time I'm going to give it the class name of button container. And we've actually used this before, right? So this should essentially apply this padding so that it essentially makes everything go from left to right. And I actually want the same styling to be on the info container. So I can actually do comma info container, and this styling will be applied to both classes. Okay, wonderful. And what do I want to be in the button container? Well, some buttons, I guess. So let's put in one button. This is going to be to edit, and another button. This is going to be to delete. Okay, so I'm going to add that functionality to the list item. Let's also pick this button out. Let's give it a class name, and I'm going to give it the class name of edit. And let's also give a class name to this one. I'm going to give it the class name of delete. Okay, great. So that's what I have done. Let's carry on. In fact, I think we should probably make the list item an actual list item element, as that does exist. So let's go ahead and do that. That's what I have done. Wonderful. This should be class name, otherwise that class name will not be applied. So just make sure that says class name. Great, I'm happy with that. So that's what it looks like at the moment. I think this looks good. Let's go ahead and create our custom tick icon next. So let's do it. I'm just going to get rid of that and get rid of that. And let's bring up our tick icon. Okay, so our tick icon is essentially going to be an SVG. So it's just going to return an SVG. So SVGs are fun. Okay, I've actually taken this SVG from Font Awesome icon. So please go ahead and do the same. I am not going to create a custom SVG. It's very difficult. However, we can just use libraries such as this one in order to get, so for example, I can get the code for this simply by selecting the one I want and grabbing this whole SVG code. Okay, so that's what I am going to do. There it is again. Here's the URL. Please copy this and we can customize it as well. So just paste it in like so. There we go. Okay, so there is my SVG. That's all I'm returning. I'm going to give this a class name as I'm going to pick it out, but the width we can essentially control from here. I'm going to put 25. The height, I'm also going to put 25. The view box, I'm going to keep the same. And then the title icon, let's keep the same. The path, however, I think it's fine to leave it as it is. So this, however, the style, so the style is something that will not work on here. So there is the style. We're going to have to essentially do this in, so let's pick out that whole style in CSS. Okay, so I've just taken that and let's give this SVG the class name of tick and save it. And now in here, so this is on the list item, so I can even go then the list item. If something with a class of tick exists, then it's going to have this style. So now I'm just going to get rid of that style word and just put it in like so. So putting everything in like that. Okay, and there we go. I do think maybe we should make this generic, but it's up to you. So I can make it generic if I want. Okay, and this is actually on the path. So this is the SVG with the class name of tick. We need to apply that to the path. So we're going to look for an element with a class of tick, and then the path that lives on it is going to have this styling. Okay, and now I'm going to grab the SVG itself. So the tick, and just pad it out from everything. So I'm going to give it a padding of 10 pixels. And wonderful. So this is looking good. I don't need this styling either. So let's just go ahead and delete that. And this is what my code should look like for my SVG. Okay, so there it is. Let's carry on. So now if I look in here, ta-da, there is my tick. It's looking wonderful. I'm happy with that. Let's move on. So great. I think this is looking good. Let's carry on. The next thing I'm going to do is just style up these buttons. So let's go ahead and do that. We have one to edit, we have one to delete, and we also have one to create. So I'm just going to make these buttons generic. So just put them up here. And if something has the class of edit, I'm going to override the border. I'm going to give it 1.5 pixels solid, and then this RGB color that I picked out earlier. So there we go. I'm just adding a green, and I'm also going to make sure that the color of text is going to essentially be the same color. So let's give this RGB, and then I'm also going to make sure that the background color is transparent, even though that's a default, so that should be applied. And the text transform, I'm going to say uppercase. So perhaps we don't need that. Let's carry on. Okay, so that's what my edit button looks like. And then let's perhaps also add a on hover to it. So I'm going to grab anything with the class of edit, and I'm going to say if we hover over it, I'm just going to change the background color slightly, and I'm going to use RGB for this, and I'm going to use 182.223.186. So it should no longer be transparent anymore. And there we go. And finally, I'm just going to do one for the active, and for active, so let's grab this. So if we actually click on anything with a class of edit, so anything with a class of edit, right, I'm going to get the border and color and background. So background color, and I'm going to change it slightly. So I'm going to use RGB 141, 181, 145, and I'm happy with this green. However, the font color, I'm going to change to white. So I'm going to do 255, 255, 255. Okay, so it should look like that. Great. And now let's do the same for the delete. So once again, I'm going to grab anything with the class of delete. And for delete, well, I'm just going to say that I want to give it a border that is 1.5 pixels solid. And I'm going to go with RGB 255, 175, 163 this time. So kind of reddish color. I'm also going to make sure that the font is the same so they match. And I'm also going to make everything uppercase. So text transform uppercase. Great. And then I'm going to say that if we hover over anything with the delete class, I'm going to change the background color. And the background color is going to be RGB 255, 201, 193. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And once again, I'm going to grab delete and say that if we actually click on anything with the class of delete, well then I want to add a border, 1.5 pixels, solid, RGB 255, 175, 163. Okay, great. And just add a background color. That's essentially the same. So I'm going to choose that and then make sure that the font is white. So RGB 255, 255, 255. So just the same as before. In fact, I'm not even sure if we need this. Let's just check because that is coming from there anyway. So let's check it out. If I click on it, okay, so we don't need that. Let's get rid of that. That is some unnecessary code. That is coming from the delete class anyway. So just do the same for the active class for edit as well. Wonderful. So this is all looking fantastic. Next, we also need to do the create button. So edit, delete, and create are the buttons that we're going to be having. And the create, I'm going to give this a border. 1.5 pixels solid RGB 108, 115, 148. And then let's also give it a color. So let's make the font the same. So I'm going to grab that and make sure the font's the same. Text transform, we're going to do uppercase one more time. Okay. And then the background color, well, that is going to be transparent, so we don't have to do that. Once again, let's change what we do on hover. So on hover of create, I'm just going to change the background color, and it's going to be a lighter version of that same purple. So I'm going to use 131, 138, 172. And then also if we grab create and say it's active, so if we actually click on it, I essentially want to get the background color and change it to be this color. Okay, and let's just change the font color too. So using color, I'm going to do RGB 255, 255, 255. Okay. And great. So there we go. Just the sign out button, I believe, next. So let's do .sign out. And if something has the class of sign out, I'm going to give it a border of 1.5 pixels solid RGB 255, 175, 163. This time I'm also going to make sure that the background color is this for a sign out button. So it's going to be slightly different. And the color is going to be RGB 255, 255, 255. So just making sure that it is white. Okay, great. And don't forget that last semicolon. And this time if we hover over a sign out button, so just make sure to do that. Let's change the background color. And I'm just going to make it RGB 17594 this time with the same border. Okay, so I'm just literally changing the color, 1.5 pixels solid. And then this is going to be it. Okay, so that's what our sign up button looks like at the moment. In fact, we don't really want the color of this to be white. Let's maybe make it 234, 234, 234, so we can actually read what is there. That is very light. Let's also make this important as to override any background color. So there we go. Let's also apply it for the hover, as I don't know why that's not being applied. So that is now being applied. That is good. And finally, if we're active on the sign out button, so active, we're going to change the border 1.5 pixels, solid, RGB 175, 8181. Let's also change the background color to be the same. And this time, let's make the font white. So color RGB 255, 255, 255. Okay, so great. And I believe we should probably have to make this important as it's having trouble overriding that. So I'm just going to add that just to be sure. And great. That is looking good. Okay, so we finished the styling of this app. Let's actually get to maybe adding new ones if we click on here. So for this, I want a modal to pop up. So let's go ahead and do that. So I think let's actually work on our modal next. So our modal, well, first off, let's actually style this to look like an actual modal. So I'm actually going to wrap this all in the class name overlay. So we can add an overlay for when we are interacting with this modal. Okay, so after we create that overlay, we then actually want to show our modal, right? So let's give this the class name of modal. So there we go. Now, what do we want to have in our modal? Well, I'm going to create a div, and this is going to hold our title as well as a button. So I'm going to have an H3 element in here, and this is going to say, let's create your task. However, this, I actually want to be based on whatever mode we're viewing the modal in. So for example, if the mode is create, I want to show that in here. So let's get up our curly braces and just type the mode. So this string, which is assigned to this const, will now show up in here. Same if I change this to edit. Okay, so that is something we want. And I also want a button in here to essentially shut down our modal. So here is my button, and I'm just going to put in an X for now. Okay, and that is how we shut the modal. Next, I'm also going to have a form in here. So let's create a form. I'm going to also give this the class name of, let's go with form title container so we can pick it up. Now, what do we want to go in our form? Well, we're going to have an input, right? So essentially all the inputs that we need in order to create our task. So we're going to have 3 inputs, I think. Let's just have an input for the title, an input for the progress, and then an input with the type submit. Okay, so that is essentially going to show up as a button, right? Okay, and the first input, I'm going to make it required. So let's put required, and I'm going to add a max length based on our database. I want this to be 30 for the task title. And as a placeholder, so as some placeholder text, I'm just going to put your task goes here. I put in a space, so just space it out a little bit from the edge. And as a name, I'm just going to put title. Okay, so that's the name of my input. And as a value, I'm just going to put, for now, an empty string. And we're going to essentially update something every time the input changes. So we're going to write a function called handle change to do this. So const handle change. Okay. For now, I'm just going to console log changing so that we know what is going on. So that is my first input, okay? The type of it is text as a default. Let's maybe also put in a break here. So I'm just gonna put in a break element. And let's now have an input. The type of this, I'm gonna change to be range because I want this to be a slider. So that's what I've done. Let's also put this as required. I'm also going to give this a min and a max. So the minimum of this is going to be 0 and the max of this is going to be 100. Let's name this something. So this name of this input is going to be progress. just like so. Okay, and the value of this is going to be just an empty string for now, and it's also going to update every time we change. So this is going to handle change. Okay, great. And like I said, this input is going to have the type of submit, and on click of it, we are going to essentially either post some data to our database or edit some data. That part is going to be totally up to us. Okay, and the class name of this input is going to be either create or edit. So I'm just going to pass through the mode that we are currently viewing this in, which as we just wrote, so we already have a class name of create and a class name of edit, and this can be applied to anything, so not just a button, which means that we can apply it to this input as well. Wonderful. So currently we are on mode edit, so it should show me the edit button. However, we actually need to see this modal, right? So perhaps let's go ahead and grab this element and let's show it on the list header, okay? Because if we click on here, we want to create a new element, right? So for now, what I'm going to do is essentially right before this finishes, I'm just going to put in my modal, okay? Which means we need to import it into here. So I'm also going to import modal from, and then we're going to get the modal. So at the moment, this is what it looks like because we haven't started up. So let's get to doing that next. Okay, so let's get up our index CSS file. And first off, I'm just going to pick out the overlay. So let's do that all the way down here. Let's start styling our modal. Okay, so I'm just going to comment that out for now. So let's grab our overlay. Now our overlay is going to have a position of absolute because it doesn't want to take anything into account. So position absolute is what I'm going to give it. From left, I want 0. We're also going to do top 0, right? So it sits to the top. The width, I'm going to do 100 of the viewport width. The height, I'm going to do 100 viewport height. Okay, just to make sure it covers the whole viewport. The background color, I'm going to go with a black. So RGBA, make it transparent of 0. Yeah, sure, let's do this one. Maybe let's make it 0.5, however. And then I'm going to initialize Flexbox. And I'm going to use justify content center to center everything from left to right. And I'm going to use align item center to center everything from top to bottom. And we've assigned a height, so that should work. Okay, so that's what our overlay looks like. Now let's get to styling up the modal. So now I'm going to grab the modal next. Okay, so the child of the overlay. Now let's also just grab the modal. And what do we want to style our modal like? Well, I'm actually going to hard code a width for it of 500 pixels. So just like so, I'm going to give it a background color of white. So I'm going to do RGB 255, 255, 255, just like so. And let's pad it out. So I'm going to do padding 40 pixels. I'm going to also do border radius 10 pixels. And I'm also going to do box shadow. Okay, and my box shadow is going to be RGBA 000 0.05. 0 pixels x-axis, 6 pixels y-axis, 24 pixels spread, and 0 blur, and then overlay it with another box shadow. So again, RGBA, and I'm going to do 000 0.08 as the color, and then 000 and 1 pixel spread. Okay, so this is what my modal looks like at the moment. Next, let's also decide that we want our form title container. So let's grab that. And for readability, I'm just going to say that it lives inside the modal. I'm going to initialize Flexbox on it. So display flex. And I'm going to use justify content space between this time. Okay, so that those two items appear like so. And now let's also grab the button that lives inside the form container. Okay, so I'm just going to grab the button that lives inside of it. And I'm going to do border none, as well as the background color transparent. So that's what I have done. And that will just mean that my X looks like this. Great. Next, let's also make sure that it has an active class. So when it's active, I'm simply going to essentially change the color of the text to be this kind of red color. So that's all I want to do in this case. Okay, great. Okay, now I'm going to get the form, but only the form that lives inside of the modal, okay, no other form. And I'm going to use a display flex and then say that the flex direction I want is column to make sure that everything is stacked on top of each other like so. And now I'm going to get any label that lives inside the modal as well, because we're going to add labels in here. And I'm just going to say that I want the font size of the labels to be 13 pixels. So great. That's what it looks like at the moment. Let's also edit the inputs. Now, this isn't the only place I'm going to put inputs. So perhaps let's maybe just put them up here. So I'm going to make them generic. So put them with all the generic stuff. So let's grab any input that lives in our project and just give it a margin of 11 pixels from top to bottom and 0 from the left and right. I'm also going to give each one a padding of 12 pixels top and bottom and 16 pixels left and right. And let's round each one off. So I'm going to do border radius 12 pixels. Okay. And let's also give each one a border of 1.5 pixels solid and RGB. And we go with 230, 232, 236. Okay. So our inputs should now look like this. Great. And you will see how that edit class has been added to this input. Okay, so I am happy with this. I think it's now time to move on. So back in here, I'm just going to add a label here. Okay, and this label is going to say drag to select your current progress. And this is going to be for the range, which means I need to give this an ID. So I'm going to give this the ID of range, which means that this label is for anything with the ID of range. Okay, so for ID, and that's how you essentially link them up. Okay, now to start off, this modal essentially is going to have to store data, right? So we're going to have to essentially import state to do that. So I'm going to import use state from React. Okay, wonderful. And if we are on create mode, so we're creating a new one, I essentially want to save whatever the data is. So data, and then we're going to use set data to change that data. And I'm going to use state and start off with state being an empty object. Because when we create essentially our object that's going to represent a to-do item, of course we're getting the title from the modal, and of course we're getting the progress, but we also need to add the user email behind the scenes as well as the date, so today's date. So for these reasons, I'm just going to put each of the properties that make up my object in here, and I'm going to override them if need be. So title, and then we're going to have progress, empty string, and then the date. So if we are creating, so let's go ahead and just put mode up here, and I'm going to put edit mode, right, like this. And if mode equals edit, and this is true, then we know that we are in edit mode. So we're going to put true, otherwise we put false, right? So let's put the mode up here once again. We are actually in create mode. So to get a const of edit mode that stores a Boolean, I'm getting the mode, and if mode equals edit, and this is true, then we want to return true. Otherwise, we want to return false. Okay? So now let's get edit mode. And if we are in edit mode, and this is true, well, we're going to want to essentially get the date from the object we are passing through. Otherwise, we're just going to use new date and get today's date. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. This can be a bit confusing because, you know, we're going to be using this mode for creating new tasks, but also editing tasks too. But like I said, we're on create mode. So let's pretend we're in create mode. Let's pretend we're, just getting the contents of these inputs for the first time and saving them to state. Okay, so let's do it. In order to do this, I'm going to have to handle the change. And we're going to get whatever input we are essentially interacting with. So let's pass through E, and we're going to get each one of the inputs names. So we're going to create essentially a property and value pair based on the name and the value. Okay, so if we grab E, and I'm just going to put in E here. For now, if I interact with this, and let's look at our console log, this is the whole E object, okay? It's telling me that I am interacting with an input, okay? That's the target input, and it has a name that has title. So we're gonna get that E name, and we're gonna also get the E value. So let's get the E name, and I'm gonna save this as something. I'm going to, well, essentially we can get the whole E target, and we can destructure it. Okay, we're destructuring that whole object, and we're getting the name and value from it. Okay, so that is a cool way to do that. Hopefully this is useful for you. But again, we're essentially going into that object, getting the whole target object and getting the name and value from it. So there's the name, as you can see here, and we're also going to get the value. So we're destructuring that from the object. Once we have that name and value, let's create our key value pair. And I'm going to change the data using set data. So in order to essentially set the data of an object, I'm going to essentially get whatever exists already in there, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to destructure everything in there like so. So I'm spilling all of this out, spilling all of that back into here. And now I'm going to override certain things. So I'm going to get the name and go into the object and create a property based on the name. And then I'm also going to get that value and just assign it to the value. Okay? So essentially, if I'm interacting with something that has the name of title, we're going to override this. And if I'm interacting something with the name of progress, we're going to override this. Okay, so we're going to be changing this object, and this is the syntax to do it. I understand why it's confusing, so please take your time with this. Okay, I'm actually just going to console log out data to show you this changing. So let's delete that, and now let's look in here. So here is my console, and if I just type A, okay, you will see that original object, and title is just been changed to A, and I can also change the progress. I can override this progress from being a string to actually having a value. Okay, so there we go. I've just changed it to 67. Now let's actually show this in the modal. So I can do so by essentially grabbing the data title, okay, and then passing it through here. So data title, and also grabbing the data and getting progress from it. So now that will be represented in here too, just like so. So that is my new object. This is essentially what I want to pass through to our server in order to create a new task. Before that, we also need to update our user email. So let's carry on. So we have already done this in create mode. However, I think we should be able to set what mode we are in from the parent itself, which is the list header. So here, if we click on it in the list header, well, this will be to create, right? So I want to essentially pass through the mode of create. So I'm just going to pass through the string of create. If we are clicking on it from the list header, so because we essentially interact with this button, and I want to also control if we see the modal or not. So on click of this, I also want to set the show modal. So I'm going to essentially get my use state syntax. So I'm going to put show modal and then set show modal here too. And use state for this is going to be null to start off with. So now let's go ahead and import use state from React. And now I can change this So in fact, show modal should probably be false, as we don't want to start off with a show modal being seen. And then I'm going to use set show modal. So if we click on this, I want to set show modal to be true. Okay? And we just called this method, so we need to make this a callback function again. So that's what I am doing by adding this code. Okay? Wonderful. So great. Let's test it out. However, I also want to control if we see the modal or not from the modal, right? Because it has this little button right here, which will allow us to essentially shut down the modal. So let's also pass through the set show modal method into here so that we can use it. So now on the modal, I'm essentially passing through, let's destructure the props, the mode and set show modal, right? Because I'm passing through mode and set show modal. So let's pass that through mode, set show modal, which means we don't need to hard code the mode here anymore. That's being passed down here. If we click on it from the list header, the mode that we pass down is going to be the string create. And set show modal. Well, on this button right here, I want to essentially on click, once again, let's make this a callback function, set show modal to be false. Just make sure that that is on click. And also let's just change this to be your task. Okay, great. So we are passing that through, and essentially on the list header, we only want to see this if show modal is true. So let's wrap all of this in some curly braces, and if set show modal is true, then we can show this component. Okay, so if this is true, then we also show that. So let's save this and test it out. Okay, great. So let's create your task. We can open the modal and shut it. Let's do the same for showing the modal if it's on edit mode next by clicking on this button. Okay, so this time, instead of doing this on the header, we're going to have to store state on the list item to set the show modal or not. So once again, I'm just going to import use state from React. Should probably have that on the first line up here. And then I'm going to use const show modal set show modal, and then use state and start off with it being false. And now if show modal exists, so I'm going to do this probably right here. I'm going to get up my curly braces, show modal, and I'm going to show the modal. Okay, so the modal element like so. So let's go ahead and import that. Next, I'm going to import modal from modal. Okay. Great. And on click of this, so on click of this button, I essentially want to set show modal to be true. And we've just called that, so we need to make this a callback function. And if it is true, the mode we want to pass into this, well, it's going to be edit, as we are clicking on an edit button. So that makes sense. That is the mode we want to pass through. And we also want to control if we shut this modal or not. So I'm going to have to pass through set show modal like so. Okay. So great. So let's test this out. So if I click on here, let's edit your task, and I can also shut it. However, if we are editing a task, we also want to pass through the data from that task, right? So I think we should do that. I think we should get the whole task that is populating our list item and pass that through into the show modal. Okay? So let's pass that through into the modal as a third prop if it exists. And if it exists, then we want to essentially get the task and get the user email from it, if it exists, right? And if we are in edit mode, I guess, so if we are in edit mode and that is true, then we get the task's user email. Otherwise, we start off with it being null. Same for the title. If we are in edit mode, then we get the task title. Otherwise, we put null. And same for the progress. If we are in edit mode and this is true, we get the task progress. Otherwise, it's null. Or let's make it 50 to start off in the middle. Okay, so this just means if I click edit, it will populate my app with the task data. However, if we add a new one, it starts off fresh. So once again, edit, it's populating the title, it's populating the progress. And if we click a new one, they're both refreshed and reset. So null and 50 is the values that are being passed through. Okay, great. Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's get to actually using this data in order to send it to our database. So let's start off in create mode first. So let's go ahead and write a function for if we want to post data to our database. So just as if we're creating a new post. So post data is going to be my function. And post data, well, we're going to use try and catch, okay, to catch any errors. So catch error, just like so. So this is what I'm going to start off with. And if there are any errors, we're just going to console error the error. So just like that. Okay. And what do we want to try? Well, we're going to fetch, and let's actually write this in our server. So let's get up our server next. I'm just going to minimize these and get up our server. So this time we want to create a new to-do to put in our database, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So to create a new to-do, we're going to have to use the post method, and let's post to the to-dos endpoint. Okay, so let's just keep it like that. That is absolutely fine. It's a post method, so it's okay if it starts off with the get method one as well. So they're kind of similar, but that is fine. And then we're going to pass through the request and the response. So this is my syntax. And in here, once again, I'm going to use the try and catch blocks. So catch any errors, and then console error the error. So we can see what is going on under the hood. Now, if I want to make a new to-do, well, let's actually write the command that we're going to have to do this. I'm going to use pool query, and the command that we wrote in order to insert new items into our to-do table is insert into, and then the table is called to-dos. And then let's open up our parentheses because we're going to have to put an ID column, a user email column. Make sure to spell exactly the same as we did when we created our row very early on. We also need to pass through a title. We also need to pass through the progress, and we also need to pass through a date. So that's what we need to do. And the values are going to be, well, I'm going to use variables for this. So we're going to have one variable, a second variable, a third variable. I'm going to have 5 variables in total. So 4 and 5. And now let's actually pass through the values of those variables. So I'm going to open up my array, and then we're going to have to pass through an ID, a user email from our front end. So user email, a title from our front end, progress from our front end, and the date from our front end. So let's this time attach that to the body. So we're going to attach to the request body this time, not the params, and we're going to destructure all those things from there. Okay, we're not going to destructure the ID as we are not passing that through. We're just passing through these 4 things. So we're going to pass through the user email, the title, the progress, and the date. Okay. So we're going to pass through those 4 things. I'm also wanting to make a unique identifier, and we imported a package to do this. So let's go ahead and use it. So up here, I'm going to this time const, it's going to use v4. This is from the documentation. I'm going to use UUID version 4, and it's going to require the package that we installed called UUID. So this is going to give us a unique identifier. So if I get this method and I call it, I can make a new ID. So that's what I've done, and I'm just going to save it as ID, and that will be passed through here. So now let's get into passing through these 4 variables with my request body. So we know the URL we need to go to. It's localhost 8000/to-dos. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to put HTTP. Maybe just make sure to make it the same. So just as we wrote here, Just copy that and paste it in like so. So that's what we're fetching, right? But this is going to be a post request. We're sending data. So we're also going to have to pass through the method, which is post. So just go ahead and do that. I'm also going to pass through some headers because we're now working with JSON, right? And sending JSON over and working with JSON. So I'm going to put content type application JSON, and we're going to pass through a body, right? Because we know that we want to send some stuff over with the request body, and we want to get these things. So let's pass through those 4 things with the body. In fact, I can just pass through these 4 things because they're saved under data. So let's get data and pass it through with the body, but let's also wrap it in JSON stringify as it's an object. So that's something that we have to do. Great. So this is looking good. Let's also get the response of this. So I'm going to save the response of this. And as this is an async function, I'm going to use the await keyword in front of it, which means we need to make this an async function. Okay, so let's actually console log the response for now. So I'm just going to console log it out and let's post the data. Now, when do we want to post the data? I guess we need to post the data if we click on the submit button, right? So type submit here. Let's also add an on click. However, if we are in edit mode, so if edit mode is true, then we want to do something else. Otherwise, we want to post the data. So that's something that we have to do. And it just means if we're in edit mode, we can edit data, or if we're not in edit mode, which we're not currently, we can post the data. So let's check it out. At the moment, we're just going to be console logging the response, but I just want to see that we are passing through the data correctly here. So all I'm going to do is also console log those 4 things to check that they are passing through my request body. So for now, what I'm also going to do is on here, let's just go ahead and put bob@test.com because we can't leave it as null. So I'm just going to add new, blur, let's change that. So that is my object now. User email does exist and hit submit. And great. This does refresh the page though, so we can't see the response. To stop that refreshing as it's a form, I need to do ePrevent default to prevent the default action happening. So ePrevent default, just like so, and call it and pass through the E. So let's check it out. So one more time, add new, SSS, submit. Okay, we are getting an internal server error. This is because we are trying to pass through JSON, but we haven't actually written code for us to be able to do this. So I'm going to use app use and then express JSON and call it. So that should now work. One more time, let's submit. And now let's check it out. Let's get up our terminal. And there we go. So we're getting our username, we're getting our title, we're getting the progress, and then we're getting the date. So we're passing those 2 things in, and then we're putting them into the to-do table. Great. So this is looking wonderful. Let's carry on. Another thing I want to do is actually just show that response in the res JSON. So let's go ahead and say this is new to do. Just like so. And this is an async function. So I'm going to have to put the await keyword there and make this an async function, just like so. And this time I'm just going to use res JSON in order to return that new to do as the response. Okay, great. So now at the moment we are getting all of this, but if I click submit, we're getting the response, we're getting a 200 status. So I can also say, let's go back on the modal. Okay, instead of console logging the response, I can say that if response status equals 200, like it does this time, I can console log just for us to see worked. Okay, and what I can also do is set show modal to be false again, so shut it immediately. Okay, And then I can also get the data again. So get data, right? So get the freshest data and call it. So that's only stuff I want to happen if the response status is 200. This also means we need to pass through the get data function into the modal. So let's pass that through as the third parameter maybe, okay, as we're going to have to pass it through for both modals. So now on the list item, as the third parameter, let's pass through get data and also pass it through from the app to the list item, and also same for the list header. So pass through get data and pass it through into the modal. Okay, so there we go. Our modal's third prop is going to be get data on both the list header and the list item. But the list item has a fourth one too. And of course, we need to pass through get data into the list item and into the list header, and they both live in the app.js file. So that means that we need to pass through get data into here, but also into the list item. Okay, great. And of course that function lives here, so that should work. So let's go ahead and test that out. Of course, we need to make sure that it's under the user email of Anya@test. So on the modal, instead of hardcoding bob@test.com, I'm going to put Anya in test, and let's try it out. Because of course, we're only showing stuff that has the user email Anya. So let's create a new one. I'm going to go clean desk, and I'm going to do that and hit submit. And there we go. How cool is that? Next, let's work on if we want to edit a task. So let's do that next. So just going to minimize all these. We have written some code if we want to post data. However, let's write some code if we want to edit data. So this is going to be very similar. I'm just going to make some space here. I'm going to write edit data this time and make this a function. Once again, we know there's going to be an async function, and I want to prevent the default action happening of the form. I don't want it to refresh, so I'm going to do ePrevent default. Next, I'm going to use my try and catch blocks. So try and catch, and I'm going to catch any errors so we can see them in our console log so we can debug better. So console error, error. Okay, great. And we only want to edit data if we are on edit mode. So if we click on the input and we are in edit mode, we want to edit the data. This time we're going to await, fetch, and we're going to have to write an endpoint, but we're going to edit a specific task, and we're going to do it based on its task ID. So if we're passing through a task, if we're in edit mode and we're passing through a task, we can actually get its task ID, right? So once again, so I'm going to use backticks. I'm going to do HTTP localhost 8000 / to-dos / whatever the task ID is. So I'm just going to pass through the task ID. Okay, so now let's get up our server and write that endpoint. Okay, so we've got to create a to-do. Now let's do edit a to-do. So to edit, this is going to be a put request because we're going to find an existing element based on its ID, and then we're going to update it essentially. So let's use app put this time. Put is the correct method to use. And we're going to now find the endpoint of to-dos, and then we're going to pass through the ID as a parameter. Okay, this is once again going to be an async function. We're going to pass through the request and the response, and then we're going to get the ID from the params. So from the rec params, so just like we did before, and then we're going to destructure this to get the ID. Okay, great. And we're also going to pass through the task with the body. So I can get the request body, and I can get the user email from it. I can get the title from it. I can get the progress from it, and I can get the date from it. I can get all those 4 things from the request body. Okay, so they all live on here. Okay, and I've destructured them. Great. Now I'm going to do try and catch. So this should hopefully all be familiar to you. And I'm going to catch any errors. I'm just going to console error, the error. And what are we going to try to do? Well, we're going to use await pool query, and we're going to write a query to update. So this is the SQL query for updating. I'm going to do update to-dos. So I'm going to get the table to-dos, set user email, and then I'm going to pass through the first parameter to essentially update the email. I'm going to get the title and pass through a second parameter to update the title essentially. I'm going to get the progress and pass through a third parameter to update the progress. I'm going to get the date and pass through a fourth parameter to update the date. And then I'm going to do where ID equals the fifth parameter. Okay, and I'm going to finish this off with a semicolon. So that is my command. And now I'm just going to pass through those values. So my first parameter is going to be my user email because one is here. Next is going to be the title. Next is going to be the progress. Next is going to be the date. And then where ID is 5. So the fifth one is going to be the ID. Okay. And let's save this as something. I'm going to save as edit to do. And then I'm just going to res JSON edit to do. Okay, great. So now let's work on passing through the ID as a parameter, as well as passing through these 4 things with the request body to this URL. So we've already written the URL. We've already passed through a parameter, which is going to be our ID. Okay, we passed through the task ID. Next, we're going to have to pass through the method. So this is going to be a put method. We're going to have to pass through some headers as we are working with JSON. So I'm going to put content, type, application, JSON. Let's also maybe make this consistent, but I will be cleaning all of this up at the end. And then it's also pass through the body, which I'm just going to put as the data because we're in edit mode. So it should come back with the task user email. So whoever's attached to that task, the task title, the progress, or an empty string. So let's just change that to be the task date. So the original task date of when this was created. Okay, wonderful. So now we just need to wrap this in JSON stringify as it is an object. So I'm going to do JSON stringify and wrap that whole object in it. Great. And once again, just like we did before, so let's save the response of this. And if the response comes back with a status of 200, so if response status equals 200, well, I want to shut the modal, so make it false again, and I want to get the data again, right? I want to get the freshest data. Don't forget to put dash dash here for that to work. So let's try it out. Let's go ahead and edit this one. I'm just going to put an exclamation point. So that is the data that we're sending, right? And hit submit. And that has now been updated. How cool is that? The last thing I want to do is just delete a to-do item before moving on to the auth modal. So let's do that next. So in order to delete something, let's just go back here and perhaps let's maybe put this on a new line so you can see more of it. There we go. Of course, this code will be available too, but I just want to make sure that you can see as much as possible of it right now. Okay, so there we go. Let's write something to delete. So delete a to-do. And we're going to have to do it by its ID, okay, as that is the primary key for a to-do. So to delete a to-do item, I'm going to use app delete, so the delete method, and we're going to go to the to-dos and we're going to pass through a parameter in order for us to grab it so we know which to-do item to delete. Let's just get up our syntax for writing this method. Okay, great. So now we're going to get the ID from the request params. So request params, and we're going to destructure it to get the ID from it. So destructure that object because request params is an object to get the ID. Next, I'm going to use await pool and write a SQL query. And the SQL query to delete is literally going to be delete from, and then we're going to get the table's name where ID equals, and then we're going to pass through a variable. So that's it. And the variable here I'm passing through as the first variable is ID, so that will be replaced here. Cool. And let's save this as const deleted, delete to do, just like so. And I'm just going to do res JSON delete to do. Wonderful. Now let's stick this in a try and catch so we can catch any errors. So try, catch, error. And then I'm just going to console error, the error. Okay. And let's just grab all that and whack it in here like so. Making sure that this is a comment right here. So this time we want this to happen on the list item, right? So let's get up our list item. And this is going to happen when we click on here. So on click, I essentially want to delete item. Okay, so now let's define this. I'm going to define it up here. Const delete item equals. And then once again, we're going to use try. We're going to use catch. Error, console, error, error, and we're going to use await. So let's make this an async function. I'm going to await fetch, and then I'm just going to pass through. I'm going to use backticks. I'm going to do HTTP localhost 8000 / to-dos / and we're going to pass through an ID, right? So we've got the task passing through into here, so I can just grab its ID, and then let's save this as the response. Okay, and once again, if response status equals 200, then we can get the data again. Let's get the freshest data. Of course, you can write else if you want to handle errors, but we're not going to do that in this tutorial. Okay, we're just going to stick to the basics. And finally, I just need to pass through the method in here, and that is going to be a delete method. Okay, so just make sure to make an object and pass through that method with it. We don't need to handle JSON as we are not passing through any JSON or anything like that. So now let's test it out. So let's just go ahead and delete this one. And we've done it. Wonderful. So this is looking good. I just want to actually hide this because we are using Create React App. This will be a little bit different to how we saw them on the server. So just click on Client and create a .env file. Okay, so making sure that is in the client directory. And in here, I'm going to have to add React App to the variable, and I'm going to call it server URL. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do, and now that just means that I can replace this. So I can replace this in Kinsta, and for now I'm just going to essentially replace it here. So I'm going to just use that, and I'm going to use process env in order to get it. Okay, so that's all I have done. Please make sure to do the same essentially. So do it here. I'm just going to copy all of that. I'm going to save this file and just put HTTP localhost 8000. Okay, and where else do we do this? So we also do this on the modal. So just replace this part only. And once again up here too. So just the localhost 8000. Okay, and make sure to change that to be backticks. Wonderful. So that is it at the moment. I believe we use it one more, and that is on the app. So just replace that in here too. Great. Let's carry on. So now let's work on the auth modal. So I'm just going to shut these down, and let's get up our auth modal here. So our auth modal, well, let's give this a class name of auth container, just like so. And in here, I'm going to create a div, and let's go ahead and give this the class name of auth container box, just like so. And in here, I'm going to create a form. And my form is going to have 3 inputs. So one input, another input, and another input. I'm also going to have an H2 element that essentially, if we are on login mode, so is login mode, login, and I'm going to put that as false to start off with. So if is login is true, okay, if we are on login mode, then I wanted to say please log in. Otherwise, I wanted to say please sign up. Okay, so those are the things that I wanted to say, okay, based on this variable. Okay, so that's what I want to do. I also want this input type, so the type of this to take email. I want this type to take password, and I want this type to take password too. So that is something I'm going to add. I'm also going to add the placeholder of email for this, so people know to put their email. And for the second one, I'm going to also put password. For the third one, however, I'm going to say confirm password. And we only really want this one to show if we are signing up, right? So I'm going to wrap this one in curly braces. And if is login is not true, then we can show this, okay? Because if we're logging in, we just want to see that. And if we are not logging in, so in other words, we are on the sign up form, we want to see all 3. Great. So that is looking good. I think we should also have a 4th submit that's going to have the type of submit, right? So it's going to show up as a button. So let's give this the type of submit, just like so. Okay, and I'm also going to give this the class name of create, so we can style it as a create button. So that's what I have done. Let's carry on. So that is going to be my auth. I think we should also consider adding a p tag that is going to show some errors, but that's only if errors exist. So I'm going to say const error set error and start off with the error being null, so there's no errors. However, if they do exist, I want to show them here. So let's actually wrap this whole p element and say if error does exist, then we want to show that. Okay, and of course we need to import use state. So import use state from React. Great, so that is looking good. Next, after the form, I just want to create a div, and this is going to hold our auth options. So I'm going to give this the class name of auth options, so we can style it up. Okay, and in here, I'm simply going to put 2 buttons. One button is going to be for signing up, so we can choose to sign up, or another button is going to be for login. Okay, so that is what we can do. And I can essentially change which view we are in up here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do const is login and set is login. And I'm going to use state of this and set state to be true. Okay, so instead of having this here, I'm going to be doing this in state. So I can now use this on the button. So on my first button, I want to change the state, but I'm actually going to do this in a function. So let's call this view login. So view the login option. I'm going to pass through a status, and then I'm going to set login and whatever the status is. This is because I actually want to do 2 things in here. If we change from either view, I also want to clear the error. So I want to also set the error to be null. So now I can use this function instead, and on click, I want to view login, and I want to pass through false if we are clicking on sign up. So let's also make this a callback function now, and then do the same for here. So on click, and I'm going to view login as true because we've just clicked the login page. We want to see the login view, and then let's also make this a callback function as we have just called it, and we don't want to call it immediately. So there we go. How cool is that? One other thing we can do that is quite cool, I'm just going to put this on 2 lines so it is more readable and we can add more to this button. I can actually change the style of this based on if we are clicking this or not. So I can do background color, and if we are not on logged in, I can essentially change the color of this button to be white. So that's what I'm going to do. Otherwise, I want the color of this to be this kind of dark gray that I have picked out. Okay, so great. And now let's just copy this whole line and do the same one here. However, this time, if login is true, then we want it to be white. Otherwise, we want it to be gray. Just make sure to spell on-click correctly here. So let's see how this looks. Okay, I'm going to get the auth, and on my app, so app is here. And for now, I'm going to say auth token exists. So I'm going to say true, as essentially having an auth token or not having an auth token is going to dictate whether we see the auth modal or not. Okay, so at the moment, if auth token is true, so here is my app. If auth token is true, then we want to see everything in here. Okay, so I'm going to get the auth token and then I'm going to wrap all of this in here. So everything up till there. And I'm going to also put it in an empty div, just so that it's really obvious that we are essentially wanting to show this if an auth token exists. Otherwise, if no auth token exists, then we want to show the auth modal. Okay, so that's all I have written here. So once again, if there's no auth token, we show the auth modal. However, if an auth token exists, then we show the list header and we show the list items. Okay, so let's import that auth modal into here, auth from, and then we're going to go into the components and get the auth component. Okay, and let's say that auth token is false, then we should be able to see that auth modal. Okay, great. So now if we click on here, it should say sign up and it should show these right here. And if I click login, it should show these like so. Okay, great. So once again, changing color and showing whether we're on the sign up page or the login page. Let's style this up further next. Okay, let's carry on. Now, in order for our token to be picked up, we're actually going to have to restart the app. So on the client, I want you to just press Ctrl+C to stop that from running and then do npm and start again. And now our environment variable should be picked up. So just let that refresh and wonderful. We should also probably stop this running for, if we are not logged in. So let's go back to the app and let's just get the data if there is an auth token. So I'm going to essentially just get this and say that if auth token exists, then we want to get the data. Okay, so there we go, just save that and great. So I think we are now ready to essentially style this up. So let's get our CSS and style the auth container. So I'm going to just grab this and then I'm going to say that we're styling the auth modal. And let's grab the auth container and I'm going to use display flex and I'm going to center everything using justify content center and margin. I'm going to say 50 pixels. Okay. Next, let's grab the auth container box. So I'm going to grab that next, just like so. Okay, and I'm going to use a dot there. I'm going to say that the width of this, I want it to be 500 pixels. I'm going to give it a border radius of 10 pixels. Okay, let's tab this out. I'm going to do overflow hidden, and then also let's do a box shadow. And I'm going to do RGBA. I'm going to do black with 0.05 opacity, 0 x-axis, 6 pixels y-axis, 24 pixels blur, and then I'm going to overlay it with another box shadow. This time it's going to be 0, 0, 0, 0.08, and I'm going to do 0, 0, 0, and then 1 pixel. Okay, so great. Next, I'm going to get the form. So let's go ahead and get the form. So I can say the form that lives inside the auth container box, and I can do display flex to initialize flex box, and I can also set the direction. So I'm going to set column to make sure that everything's kind of stacked on top of each other. And let's also give it a height of 300 pixels as well as some padding of 20 pixels. Great. And the inputs we have styled already, so that should be applied. That is looking good. The last thing I want to start is these 2 buttons. So let's go ahead and grab the buttons. They live in the auth options. And the auth options, I just want that to, make sure that they're next to each other. And now the buttons that live in the auth options, so each button, every button that lives in the auth option essentially is going to have a width of 50%, a border of none, a padding of 10 pixels, and then let's also set the font color. I'm going to go with RGB 353847. Okay, so that's what I have done. And essentially they look like this. So much better. I'm really enjoying this a lot more. I'm also going to probably change the height of this. Maybe let's go with 350 pixels, just so there's a lot more space in between. Okay, great. And margin, I'm going to say 5 pixels. Okay, great. Now let's get to hooking this up. So let's do it. So we can get rid of that for now. And on the auth, let's write our code. Okay, so the things we're going to want to store up here, well, we're going to store the email. I'm going to change it using set email. And we're going to start off with email being null. We're going to do the same for the password. So const password, set password. I'm going to use state and set it to be null. And we're also going to do the same for the confirm password. So confirm password, set confirm password. And we're going to use state and start off with it being null. Okay, so we're going to use these things in order to essentially log in and sign up. And we're going to do so on the handle submit. Okay, so the handle submit is essentially going to help us deal with both of those things. And we're going to do e prevent default as we don't want our form from essentially reloading. So make sure to pass an e through here and e prevent default. Now, if we are on the sign up page, so if we are not on the login page and our password does not match our confirm password, well, we don't want to be able to do anything, right? So I'm going to set an error so we can see, and we're going to essentially set error to change this here so that it shows up right here in this P element. So my set error is going to be make sure passwords match. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do, and I'm going to return out of this. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to check for. Next, I'm going to essentially use await fetch, and I'm going to essentially go into process env and get the React app server URL, right? Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. We've used the await keyword, so we need to make this an async function. So I'm going to go in there, and then I'm going to go to /, and we're going to actually define our endpoints. So our endpoints, essentially, I'm going to pass through. So it's either going to be sign up or log in. So that endpoint, I'm just going to stick in here. So let's use this. And on the handle submit, well, the handle submit is going to go when we click on the submit button, right? So the input with the type of submit. On click of this, I want to handle submit, but I also want to pass through E, and I want to pass through an endpoint. Okay, which means we need to stop this from being called, and we need to make this a callback function, and I could just pass through E like here as well. Okay, and the endpoint, well, that endpoint is going to be dependent, or if we are in logged in state. So if login is true, then the endpoint we want to pass through is login. Otherwise, we want to pass through sign up. Okay, so that endpoint should be passed through into the handle submit so that we can construct a URL. And next we need to actually write that endpoint in our backend. So let's do that next. So in my server, I'm going to have to write 2 endpoints. One to sign up, and then one to log in. Now we've already defined those endpoints, so let's go ahead and just write them down. To sign up, well, I'm going to be posting stuff, so there's going to be a post request, and the endpoint is sign up, as we defined previously. There's going to be an async function that's passed through the request and the response, and then I'm going to use try and catch. So try and catch. I'm going to catch errors. I'm going to console error the error. Okay, so let's also grab this because our sign up function and our login function are going to be the same, but this time it's going to be the login endpoint. So just make sure that it's the same as, you know, our endpoints that we are passing through here into here in order to construct this URL. Great. So that's what we're going to be doing. And actually in both cases, we're going to have to pass stuff through. So we're going to have to pass stuff with the request body, and that is going to be our email and our password, right? So const email and const password. So whatever we are typing in as our email and password, we're going to pass to the backend, essentially so we can hash it in the sign up, and essentially so we can compare it against the hash password that we have saved in the login. So let's add that to the login as well. Great. So now let's focus on the sign up first. So if the endpoint is sign up, we're going to have to match the method, and the method is a post method as we saw here. So it is a post method, and we're going to have to pass through the email and password with the body. So we're also going to have to pass through headers for that to work, as we are working with sending JSON. So I'm going to pass through content type, and I'm going to put application JSON. Okay. And now our body that we're going to pass through, well, I could just get the email and the password. So I can create an object in order to send over my email and password, and it just means that I need to wrap it in JSON stringify in order to send that. Or you could have created a const called data and save this object to it and then pass through data. It's up to you. Okay, great. So that is cool, and let's save the response of this. So I'm going to get the response, and I'm going to get the JSON from it, and I'm going to await this as JSON is an async method, and I'm going to save this as data, and I'm just going to console log the data, because essentially what I want to happen is that when we send over this email and password, I want to return my hashed password as well as my email. So let's go ahead and do that. So once again, let's save the email and password. So let's go ahead and do that on the input types. So here is my first input. So on change of this, I'm going to do on change, and then I'm going to essentially say that I want to set email to be whatever the e-target that I'm interacting with this value is. And of course, we need to make this a callback function as we are calling that immediately. So set email, and then let's make this a callback function. So there we go. We can, of course, make this a little bit more readable by splitting this out onto different lines. And don't forget to pass through the E. So there's my first input, and here is my second input. I'm, of course, going to have to save the password too. So on change of this, I want to set password and whatever target value is, I want to update that with the password. And let's make this a callback function. And finally pass through the and do the third input. So here is my third input, which you can only really see if we are trying to log in. So let's add on change to this. And we're going to set confirm password this time to be target value. And then let's make this a callback function and pass through the So now those three things are being saved every time we interact with the inputs. I'm just going to show you this. So console log email, password, and confirm password, and save. And now here, every time I interact with this, that is being changed. And if I go on the login page, and if I go on the sign up page, all three are now saved. But we just want the email and password, right? Because the only reason we're using confirm password is to essentially check if they're the same, okay, before carrying on. So I'm passing through that email and password to the server. So here, and what do I want to do with them? Well, first off, I want to hash the password. So to hash the password, what I would do is use a package called bcrypt. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to save it as bcrypt, and I'm going to require the package bcrypt, just like so. So now I can use this and all of its wonderfulness that it comes with. So down here, when I sign up, I'm going to get the bcrypt package, and I need to generate a salt from it. So gen salt sync, and I'm going to pass through 10 salt rounds, as that is the amount of rounds that I want to essentially salt my password with. So that is going to be the salt, okay? And now I can use bcrypt again. So bcrypt, and I'm going to use hash sync to pass through my password, which can be 1, 2, 3, and then these salt rounds, okay? And the result of this is going to be my hashed password. So please refer to my hashed password section and tutorial in order to understand this better, because I really do a deeper dive with that in there. So now that we have our hashed password, it's no longer 1, 2, 3, I can pass it through with the email to save it in my database, okay? So let's do that next. I'm going to use await pool query, and then I'm going to use insert into, so the CQL command insert into to insert into my users table. So we haven't used this table much yet, and I'm going to pass through my email and my hashed password, making sure to spell exactly the same as the columns we used to create this table. So great, and the values I'm going to pass through, well, we're going to have 2, so one variable and a second variable, and then let's define those values. So I'm going to open up an array. I'm just going to do that on a new line for you, and I'm going to pass through my email that I'm getting from the body and my newly hashed password that I've hashed, so it's no longer 1, 2, 3, thanks to using bcrypt. And that's what I'm sending through into my database. Okay, so that's what we're going to do essentially. I'm going to save this under the const sign up. Okay, and we're also going to need a token, an authentication token, which allows us to say signed into the app. So again, I can do so thanks to another package called JSON Web Token. So I'm going to save this as JWT and require the package JSON Web Token. So now I can grab this in order to create a token, right? So let's go down here and sign up. So once we've signed up, let's generate a token. So I'm going to use sign from the JSON Web Token package, and I'm going to pass through my email. And then I'm going to say secret. So this is just from the documentation. And I can also say when it expires. And I can put 1 hour. So my token will expire after 1 hour. Unless, of course, I get rid of it myself. And let's save this as token. Great. So now what I want to send back is my email and my token so that we can pick it up from our front end. Now, let's go ahead and try sign up using an email that already exists. So for example, if I try sign up with Anya Test and just put 123, 123, well, we know this already exists. So if I click submit and if we console log the error, we will see here an error. So we're consoling the error and we even see the detail. So I can get that detail and essentially here, instead of just console logging the error, then I want to send over some JSON, and that's going to be the error's detail, right? Because if we console log the error, I'm just going to do error detail right here and save that to be sent back as the detail. So if I now try sign up using an email that's already been used, so Anya Test has been used, and I click submit, and amazing. We get the whole error, and now we can use the detail from it in order to show it here if we want. So I can also do set error data detail if a data detail exists. So if data detail exists, then I just want to show it here. Okay, great. So that is something that I can do with the errors. Otherwise, if nothing exists, I want to get the res JSON, and we are sending the email and token. So let's go ahead and get that. I'm actually going to get that data email, and I'm going to use set it to cookies using set cookie. And this is something that comes with a package that we are yet to install. So I'm going to set cookie, and I'm going to call this cookie email. So that's all I'm going to do. And I'm also going to use set cookie to set the auth token that should be returned back to us. So that is going to be the data token, okay, that gets sent back to us if there's no errors. So let's go ahead and install that package next. So the package I need to install is React Cookie. So on the client this time, I'm going to stop that from running, and I'm going to do npm install React Cookie as well as .env, as we are using the .env package on the front end too. So just go ahead and install those two things. Okay, and now let's start it again by using the command npm run start. And there we go. Great. So now I can use that package. I'm going to import use cookies from React Cookie. And the syntax for this will be very familiar. I'm going to use const cookies set cookies or cookie and remove cookie. So they've written it to look like a React hook, and I'm going to use cookies and just leave this blank for now. Okay, great. So now I can set cookies, and if I just console log the cookies, I can see them at all times. But not only this, okay, so let's try this out. So if it's a success, we want to, of course, set the cookies, but that's not all we want to happen, right? We also want to refresh the page. So I'm going to do window location reload, okay? Because only once we set the cookies do we want the page to reload, and we want it to affect the auth token that essentially tells us what we can see and can't see on the app. So on the app now, I'm going to go in here, and I'm also going to import use cookies from React Cookie. And instead of hard coding my user email, so let's get cookies set cookie, remove cookie, use cookies null. I can get that user email from the cookies, right? So I can essentially use cookies and get the email from it. Okay, and I can also get the auth token. So auth token equals cookies auth token, making sure to spell exactly the same as you did when you set the cookies. So now auth token, we can delete that here, and it will control what we see on our app. One other thing we need to do is stop hard coding alias. So we do so on the modal, I believe. So let's not hard code this anymore. Let's get this from the cookies. So once again, I'm going to import use cookies from React Cookie and then do const cookies, set cookie, remove cookie, and then use cookies and start off with it via null. And now I can use cookies email right here. Great. Okay, so let's test that out. So I'm just going to sign up. I'm going to sign up with sarah@test.com. I'm going to do 123, 123. I'm also going to get my application up to check if it's saving to the cookies. So on your cookies, just make sure you are clicked on localhost 3000 and click submit. And great, that auth token has been saved as well as the email so that we can use it. And our page is reloaded. And because an auth token exists, we are seeing this page. How cool is that? So once again, with an auth token, we can see this. And if I remove this, so if I delete it, and if I delete the email, and I now refresh the page, reload the page, we are no longer logged in, okay? So because we are no longer logged in, we see this auth modal because of the code that we wrote here, okay? Because if an auth token exists and we're going into the cookies and getting that auth token, if it exists, then we show the list header. And if it doesn't, we see the auth modal component, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Let's carry on. Now let's deal with logging back in. So essentially the endpoint that we are passing through needs to be login, right? And it's going to be on login essentially if we click on here. So then we're just going to pass through the email and the password, sure. So again, we are passing through the email and the password with our body to the login endpoint. But instead of hashing it this time, we're going to check it against the hashed password. So let's do that here. So essentially, down here, I'm going to use await pool query, and then I'm going to do select all from users where email equals, and then we're going to pass through a variable. And that variable is going to be the email that we're passing through with our body. And because we know that in our table, we made the email unique, we made it the primary key, this should always come back with maximum 1 item in the array or 0 items in the array. So const users, let's save the response at this, and if users rows length, so if that does not exist, if there is no length, then we know the user does not exist. So I'm just going to send back rows JSON, and then the detail of this is going to be user does not exist. So we can save it as an error. Otherwise, we're going to await bcrypt. And bcrypt comes with a compare method that will allow us to pass through our password, which can be 123, and compare it to the password that we saved, the hash password. So I'm going to go into the users array. So that is the array, and get the first item and get the hashed password from it. So hashed password, just like so. And I'm going to compare the two. So 123 compared to the hash password. Now, if this is a success and they match, okay, so if this is a success, I can say that if success, I'm going to send back res JSON, and I'm going to send back the email, which is going to go into the users rows and get the first item and get the email. And I'm also going to send back a fresh token. So to create a token, well, we've already done this, so I can simply grab this code right here to create a new token for us. So let's do that here, and great. Otherwise, if it is not a success, I'm going to send back res JSON, and then I'm going to send back the detail of just login failed, so something generic. Okay, great. So that's what I have done. Let's test it out. So this time, let's just refresh this and let's get up our application. So we know that AnyaTest.com exists. So if I sign in, hit submit, we're saving the auth token and we're saving the email to the cookies, and we see our to-do for Anya. This is great. The last thing we need to do is just sign out. And to do that, we need to remove the cookies. So let's do it. So in order to sign out, well, this is on the list header. So there it is. And my sign out function, so if we click on the button, I'm going to remove the cookies. And for that, I need to import use cookies from React Cookie. And then also we need this syntax right here. So I'm just going to grab that and stick it in here. And now I'm going to use remove cookie to remove the email cookie, as well as remove the auth token cookie to spell it exactly the same as you have right here in the cookies. And then we're going to refresh the page. So I'm going to do window location reload and call it. So let's test it out. Let's sign out this time. And great, we are now signed out. And let's sign up again, this time with Darius at test.com. Let's put 123, 123, submit. And great, we are now signed in as Darius. He has an email and an auth token. And now we can add new items. So Dar's item, click submit, and that will show up. Amazing. So this is looking so good. One last thing we could do is actually display the username in here. So let's go ahead and do that. Maybe let's do that on the app itself. So perhaps just under the list header, I'm going to put a p tag. And this is going to say welcome back, and then the user email. So I'm just going to put in the user email that we have saved from the cookies right here. So that is what it's going to say. And then also at the bottom of here, I'm also going to put a p tag, and this is going to say Creative Coding LLC. So just like that. And now let's start these two things up. So I'm going to give the class name of copyright, and then give this the class name of user email. Okay. So there we go. And now let's start this up. I'm just going to get rid of all of these things and go into the index CSS, and I'm just going to pick out the copyright and also pick out the user email, just like so. I'm going to give the copyright the font size of 13 pixels. I'm also going to give it a margin from the top of 10 pixels, as well as a color of RGB 114, 114, 114. And then for the user email, I'm going to make it float right. So float right. I'm also going to give it, well, let's just give it all these two. Okay, so just like that. And now this looks like this. How much better is that? Okay, so now it's time to build out the progress bar. So let's just get rid of these and get up the progress bar. Now the progress bar, well, I'm going to have an outer bar and an inner bar. So let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to give this the class name of outer bar, just like so. And then I'm going to create a div inside and give this the class name of inner bar. So that's what I'm doing. And then we're going to have to, of course, style both of these up. But the width, I'm going to control from the JavaScript file, and it's going to be based on the progress we pass in. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm also going to assign a random color. However, first, let's start with the basics and just grab that outer bar Okay, so I'm just going to grab it down here. I'm going to give it a width of 200 pixels and a height of 14 pixels. And I'm going to make sure the background is just one color. So let's go ahead and do that background color. And I'm going to go with RGB 216, 216, 216. So kind of grayish color. There we go. And I'm also just going to round off the edges. So let's give it some border radius. I'm going to go with 7 pixels. And I'm just going to use overflow hidden to hide essentially the inner bar if it's outside of that border radius. So let's also grab the inner bar just like so. And I'm just going to give it a height of 14 pixels because as we said, we want to control the width from here. Okay, great. So now I'm just going to put this on another line just like so. Okay, because I'm going to use style and then use 2 curly braces in order to give this a width of whatever the progress is. So let's pass through the progress into the progress bar. So where does that live? That lives on the list item. Here is the progress bar. Just going to pass through the progress just like so, and that lives on the task object. Okay, great. So now that width is just going to be, I'm going to use my backticks for this because I want to insert the progress, and I'm just going to add a percentage sign at the end. Okay, so that's all I have done. We of course haven't assigned it a color. So another thing I want to do is give it a background color. So I'm going to use background color spelled like this. Okay, so camel case. And you know, I could just go red if I want, and that will be red. Okay, but I don't want this. I want it to be a random color each time. So to do this, I'm actually just going to use an array of random colors. So here's my colors array. And inside, I'm going to put in some random colors that I have picked out. So these are my random colors that I'm going to use. So we're going to essentially choose from one of these, right? These are actually colors that I kind of already used in this project just to keep everything a little bit consistent in terms of a color scheme. Okay, and I think we should just have 4. So I'm just going to put in the others. Okay, 1, 4, 8, and one last one. So it's again a string, and I'm going to go 1, 4, 1, 1, 8, 1, 1, 4, 5, just like that. So that is my colors array. Now to get a random color from here, well, you know what to do. We're going to get that colors array. We're going to pass through an index from 0 to 3, essentially 0, 1, 2, 3, right, to get back one of these 4. And I can do so by getting the colors length, and to make it random, I'm actually going to multiply it by math random, and I'm going to also pass this whole thing through math floor to round it down to the nearest full integer. So we get a full integer. This will return a full integer that is either 0, 1, 2, or 3. Okay, great. So that's what I have done, and I'm going to save the return of this as random color, just like so. So now I can get that random color and just put it here, and now we'll get a random color from that array each time. Great! I'm loving how this is looking so far. One last thing I'm going to do is actually on the list item, just grab the task title, okay? And I'm just going to assign it a width so that it's hard-coded at all times of 300 pixels, okay? So that is what it's going to look like. Okay, so we are done here. The next thing to do is deploy this. So to do this, first off, I'm just going to go to GitHub, and I'm going to drag this code onto a new directory. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new repository. I'm going to call this deployed to do app. And then let's make it public. I'm going to add a README, and I'm just going to create the repository. Now in my project, well, I'm actually going to delete the node modules as we won't be able to upload them and we don't need them. Okay, I'm also going to delete any package lock.json files, so delete that too. Let's delete this one. So delete all 3 of the package lock.json files from this project, just delete them, as well as all 3 of the node modules. So there's one more, delete. There's some node modules, so delete those. And there's some node modules, so delete those too. Okay, all 3 should now be deleted. Great. And now let's stop this from running. So Control-C on the server and press Control-C on the client. So that has stopped running. And now all I'm going to do is in here, well, I'm going to upload files and I'm going to upload them from my desktop. So maybe let's move this out the way. And let's open this up and I'm just going to drag in those 3 things like so into here and wait for that to do its thing. Okay, so there we go. That is now uploading. Let's just wait for this to finish. And great, and commit those files. Now let's actually upload them onto Kinsta. So let's do it. So I'm going to go back to Kinsta and I'm going to add a service. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a database. So go ahead and click on create database. I'm going to go ahead and call it to-do app and just select Postgres SQL as the database you want to work with. Your database username, well, that is just going to be generated for you. So just let that generate itself. Okay. And just go ahead and select your data location. So I'm just going to choose the closest one to me essentially. And then the size, I'm going to go with the smaller size and I'm going to create the database and wait for that to do its thing. Okay, great. So while that's doing its thing, let's go ahead and do some other stuff as well. So essentially what I want to do is create a table in Postgres. So we're going to now have to use that username and database password to communicate with our Kinsta database. And I'm going to do so using pgadmin. So please go ahead and download pgadmin if you haven't already. Okay. In here, you're going to have to put in your master password. So this is a master password that you set. And let's go ahead and create a database called to-do app. So just like we named it here. Now back on Kinsta, we're going to have to wait for the external connections to generate. So just wait for that to do its thing. And once they do, I just want you to copy the external host name. Okay, and then I just want you to paste it in like so. Okay, and also grab the external port and paste it in like so. And finally grab the username and paste it in like so. And also grab the password and paste it in like so. And click save. So there we go. Now we should be able to communicate with our Kinsta database through pgadmin. Okay, great. So now let's actually create our table. So we know what to do. We can actually grab this command right here. So great that we saved it and click on the to-do app once it's finished running. And we're going to use our query tool in order to create that table. So just paste that in and execute this query and great. And do the same for creating a users table. So we're just using this in order to communicate with our Kinsta database, right? And execute this query as well. Wonderful. So now that we have done that, that's really all we need to do. Next, these are the internal connections we're going to need in order to hook up our backend that we're going to host on Kinsta to this database. So keep these in mind. I'm going to copy that host name, okay? And I'm going to also copy the username. So keep these somewhere safe and also copy this password and also copy the port. So these 4 things are necessary because now we're going to essentially create our backend. So let's add a service. This time it's going to be an application. And in my GitHub repositories, I'm just going to find that to-do app. Okay. And let's maybe make sure to differentiate this. I'm going to call this server. And the data location for this, again, I'm just going to choose one that is close to me. And as the environment variables this time, we didn't upload the .env file, okay, from our local projects, because we're going to have to put the environment variables in here in the Kinsta app instead. And I'm just going to put username, just like we did in our project. But the username this time is going to be the one I just saved to communicate with our database on Kinsta. We're also going to paste in that password. We're also going to paste in some other stuff. So what other things do we have in our project, in our backend? Well, we also had the host name and the database port. So let's put in the host. And this time I'm just going to put that instead of localhost 8000. And now we're also going to put the DB port. And once again, it's going to be the one to my Kinsta database. And once again, I'm just going to put 5432 for this. Okay, great. So this is looking good. Let's carry on. I'm just going to add another one here, and that's actually going to be for the type, and it's going to put server. So we're going to have to specify that type. And just make sure that this host does have cluster local at the end. Okay, just double check that. And once you're happy with that, click continue. Once again, I'm just going to do the standard amount. And as the start command to start this, I'm going to use npm run server. So essentially the script we wrote in our package.json file in the root of our project. And I'm just going to confirm the payment method. Great. So that is now done. Let's get to hosting our front-end application next. So once again, I'm going to click application. I'm going to find my to-do app. I'm going to find the main branch, and then let's rename this to client so we can differentiate. Okay. And let's choose the closest location to us. And as the environment variables this time, I'm going to use the environment variable for my client, which is React App Server URL. And this time I am essentially going to put my server URL, my Kinsta server URL. So let's just gravitate towards Kinsta again so we can grab it. The backend should be finished doing its thing. So once that has done, you might have to wait a bit. We're going to get this URL in order so we can go to this instead of localhost 8000. So once again, just wait for that and copy it. This is our essentially the equivalent of localhost 8000 and paste it in here. Okay, get rid of that last / that is important, and go ahead and click continue. And once again, just choose the default settings, and the start command we're going to do is npm run client, because that is what we wrote in our package.json file in the root of our project, and confirm the payment, and there we go. Now, this might take a while to deploy, but once it has done its thing, this should be kind of ready and finished. I'm just going to add one more variable here, and that is the type client. We did forget to add that, so add the environment variable again, and then okay, perhaps let's also redeploy this. So let's double check these. Those look good. And let's click on here again. So click on here and deploy again, just to make sure that variable has been added. So great. Okay, now once we do all of this, I just need to actually connect the server app to the database. So that's what I'm doing right now. Please go ahead and do the same. Just find that application. It's going to be one of the 2 applications we made on Kinsta, and just connect it like so. Once this has finished deploying, we should be able to go here, and we should be able to essentially see our app and interact with it. So let's go ahead. Let's try sign up. I'm going to put anya@anya.com, 123 123, and submit. And wonderful. We have done it. We can now add new projects in here. I'm going to go my first task and hit submit. This should be working exactly the same as it was for us locally, except now it's running on Kinsta, and we can essentially get this URL and share it with anyone we want. So this is looking fantastic. I'm so happy with this. I hope you found this useful, and I hope you now know how to deploy a fun project for personal use. Of course, this does have some security settings that we didn't cover, and we didn't write any tests or anything like that, but I think it's a cool project. I hope you agree. And I hope you've enjoyed this lesson on how to deploy a full stack application. Hey everyone, and welcome